Hi folks, this is Mr. MegaManFan. Like, share, comment, subscribe. You know all the things to do. The project that I teased yesterday is now officially underway. FedEx delivery driver dropped this off this morning and he left it on the front doorstep, so I almost stepped on it when I walked outside to get it, but felt it under my foot and was horrified and realized I should not put my foot down, so I backed up, bent down, and picked it up instead. And now I just need to get it out of the mailer and get it out of the bubble wrap, and we will be able to take a look at it and see how well it matches those photos that I uploaded yesterday from the eBay auction. So 1 second while I pick up all the scraps here, and then we will get this bubble wrap off and take a look. Well, I can't say that the seller didn't package it carefully because there were multiple layers of bubble wrap to get through. In fact, if I had put my foot down on this thing, it probably would have been fine just because I would have had the spring back cushion underneath my foot. But I'm glad I didn't, and I'm glad he shipped it so carefully, even though it was in a rather standard FedEx mailer and not a padded one of any kind. But if it's this well padded on the inside, well, I guess that makes up for it. So, after peeling, removing tape, peeling, removing some more, I finally got down to an inner plastic bag which contained the orange PS Vita 2000, a Japanese exclusive version of the Slim Vita that was not sold in the United States. The next step was to get it plugged in and get it charging. A standard PlayStation 4 or 5 charge controller cord will work here. You just plug it into the bottom and plug it into a USB hub, and Bob's your uncle, you're good to go. And it obviously wasn't going to start up until I gave it some juice because none of the buttons were doing anything. The power button at the top wasn't doing anything. So I checked a guide online, and it actually was Sony's official guide on their website that said, give it about 30 minutes and then hold the power button for 5 seconds. So I took their word for it, and that's exactly what I did. We're back now, 30 minutes later. This should have enough juice. The orange light on the top shows that it's been charging for a while, so I'm holding down the power button and let's see what we get. There's the familiar PlayStation logo and a bunch of text in Japanese, which is exactly what I expected. I am not surprised by that. We will have to go into the system settings and change it to English, although some things are already in English, such as the words PS Store. But that's going to be a little bit of a headache in and of itself because this system has already been linked to a different account. So I'm going to have to do something just to combat that. But if you import a Japanese PlayStation Vita 1000, 2000, you need to go down to the settings to the point where you see something that looks like the letter A. That's where you're going to be able to change the language. In the words of Montel Jordan, this is how you do it. You go to this menu here, you scroll up and select English United States in my case. You click the right button and boom, you are in English now on all menus for all options, which is going to make this setup a lot easier because you won't have to have a phone handy and point it at your Vita to Google Translate every single screen you're on. And with an imported Japanese Nintendo 3DS, that was what I had to do because you couldn't just change the language to English and get all of the other menus to default to English as well. So, Sony, a little ahead of Nintendo in this department. I also need to change the time zone to get this from Tokyo time or whatever part of Japan the previous owner lived in to United States time. So, scroll up until you... No, Central America, that's not what I want. Scroll up to Central Time, United States, Eastern Time, whatever time zone you're in, and then you'll be able to get things going with the next step, which is that you're going to need to update to the latest firmware, and if you want to run custom homebrew applications like I do, then you'll need to go to vita.hacks.guide and follow the procedures there. I'm not going to walk you through the entire thing in this video because every now and then the guides change, and I want you to just go to the website and get the most updated information, but I'll give you a brief summary of what you're going to do. You upgrade to the latest version of the firmware. You connect your PlayStation Vita via a USB cable to a laptop. You're going to download a couple of zip files linked in the hacks guide called h-encore and Vita deploy. You're going to unzip one of them and not the other. You're going to run the program, and then it's going to allow you to copy the install packages over to your PlayStation Vita via the USB cable. I don't think I need to go more in depth than that. Vita.hacks.guide. But once you have h-encore on your system, you can downgrade from 3.74 to 3.65, and then you can spoof your firmware in the system settings to make the PlayStation Network think you're on 3.74, at which point you can still access the PlayStation Store via your PSN account, download any games you previously purchased, do any of the things you would want to do there, and you can also run Homebrew applications on your Vita. Now, in the bad old days, it used to be that you had to restart h-encore every single time you turned on your Vita, but there is now a part of the vita.hacks.guide called ENSO, which enables you to make the changes permanent as opposed to temporary. It is going to give you a warning when you do this that if something goes wrong, it's your ass. They're not liable for it. But I've already done this once on a Vita, so I was pretty confident in doing it on the Japanese one that I imported as well. Now, there are a few more things that you're going to need to know. You're going to need the simple account switcher if a previous owner has used this on the PlayStation Network, because without it, you're not going to be able to sign into your own PSN account. It's going to spit back an error message that says you must use the account that's linked to this device. Thankfully, there's a handy application called Vita Shell that can solve this problem. You can download virtual packages or VPKs and install them using Vita Shell. And in fact, you can even run an FTP server from Vita Shell so you can transfer them directly to your Vita without having to take your memory card in and out or get a USB cable and link it to your laptop. So Vita Shell is your friend, and it's very easy to install Vita Shell. It's part of the Vita deploy options. So do yourself a favor and get Vita Shell if you didn't already get it while you were doing vita.hacks.guide. You will be using it quite a bit. You're also going to want to go into the accessibility options in the system settings and customize the button assignments, because circle and X are used the exact opposite way in Japan that they are in North America. So when you're navigating the home page and any of your folders, it's going to be really confusing if you don't swap these two buttons. The only problem is when you do this in the system settings, it can also mess up the in-game settings, which is why ReVita is really handy. ReVita is part of the Auto Plugin 2 app. I will link to that in the description. You can download that virtual package and install it on your Vita. Again, either put it on your memory card, put it on there through the USB cable, or FTP it over to your system. But once you have ReVita, you can do custom button mappings for every individual game. So you see right there, it says ReVita ready. It just runs in the background waiting for you. And when you need it, you hold start and hit square. Now, if this seems too tedious, if you don't want to remap the buttons for every single game, you can ignore setting the accessibility options, but it just depends on which is more inconvenient to you, having to change it in the game or having to learn to do it differently in the system menus. There is a hack out there that involves installing a custom config to a folder on the root of your PS Vita, and I haven't tried that yet, but it supposedly permanently remaps the circle and X buttons so that you don't have to do this either in the accessibility settings or in Vita. So if you want to go that route, go that route. But for now, at least, I'm remapping them in the accessibility settings and then setting them for Super Meat Boy with Vita. So as you will see here, I've got two remap rules. I've got circle to X and X to circle. And once I exit out of this menu, those changes will be implemented for the game every time I start the game. If you ever want to change or delete those rules in Vita, you just hold start and hit square. This is Mr. MegaManFan showing you how you can turn a Japanese Vita into an American Vita. I call it Project Vita Slim. Hey folks, this is Mr. MegaManFan. Like, share, comment, subscribe. You know all the things to do. Well, this was going to happen on the PC Engine files eventually, but getting my orange slim model PlayStation Vita just accelerated the plan and now brought it to fruition. I finally installed RetroArch so I could play PC Engine games on a PlayStation Vita. Now, there are some drawbacks to this as far as I'm concerned. The first is that RetroArch is an incredibly bloated platform, so loading it up takes a long time. Quitting games takes a long time. Launching games takes a long time. It just doesn't perform super fast. It performs well when you get into a game. I'm not objecting to that part, but I would have preferred a standalone VPK that I could have installed through Vita Shell rather than RetroArch. It would have just been nice to have a PC Engine emulator all by itself. Maybe that is available, but I couldn't find one. The closest I got was MegaManFan, and then it said you had to do line input to use it, and I thought, how am I going to do that on the Vita? I just gave up at that point, and I think MegaManFan is probably one of the cores that's in RetroArch anyway, so I just decided not to worry about it. But as you can see, it does take more than a little bit to get a game loaded up and running. By the way, I apologize for the fingerprints on the screen. I tried to wipe it down with a microfiber cloth before filming, but the light on the camera just made it look even more obvious that I had been using the touchscreen. And I guess the OLED is more notorious. More notorious. Notorious. The OLED screen is notorious for picking up fingerprints and dust and such, but I think that's probably going to be any PlayStation Vita. When you have a touch screen, it's just going to have things happen to it over time. Now, I mapped the menu button to hold down select for 2 seconds. So here I can go in and make a save state of a game in progress, or I can do it again, and I can quit out of this content, and you will see how long it takes to close a game, a PC Engine game, and go back to the menu. It's not fast. I did warn you, but it works. I mean, I guess we shouldn't expect performance at Steam Deck levels anyway. This is a handheld architecture that came out a decade ago, so it's still pretty damn good considering the age, the amount of things that you can do, the options that you have. Besides mapping the select button as the return to menu option, which I found much more convenient than the default option of holding the left and right shoulder buttons, select and start at the same time. It's kind of a tough ask when you're holding it in your hands. You almost have to set it down to do that. I also need to set the default folder to my PC Engine ROMs so I don't have to surf up a few layers to the UXO directory each and every time I want to get into it. That's tedious too, but I could either do that or I could have it scrape the folder and just install links to all of my PC Engine games. I might do that as well. I don't have the thumbnails turned on right now because it says performance takes a great hit when you auto-load thumbnails pulled from the internet. And I don't feel like I need the performance to take any kind of a hit as it is, considering the state of it right now. Again, not the actual gameplay. When I'm playing the PC Engine games, the performance is fine. It's just getting the core loaded, getting the content loaded, quitting the content when you're through and going back to the menu to select different content. That's the slow part. And if anybody knows any way to improve that performance, maybe uninstalling a bunch of the cores, maybe editing some files on the Vita, I would be welcome to finding that information out. So leave a comment below or hit me up on Twitter, MRMEGAMANFAN, Mr. MegaManFan. I'll take any advice, gladly, happily accepted. But for now, I have to say that it performs better using RetroArch in some respects than Hugo on the PSP Go or a PlayStation Portable. And one of the games I'm not showing you that would illustrate that point is Devil's Crush. The reason I'm not showing it is because every time I've tried to use footage of Devil's Crush in YouTube, I get hit with a copyright strike. Well, not a strike, a copyright claim. A strike actually hurts your channel, but a claim just means you have to share the revenue. And I guess the intellectual property owners of Aliens Crush and Devil's Crush claim that music anytime it shows up in somebody's video, so I just don't play those games for YouTube or show them off in YouTube videos like this. But when I played Devil's Crush on my PSP Go, there would be issues between, like, scrolling one screen to the next. It would seem to flicker when the ball was moving up and down. Not consistently, but intermittently, it would just seem like it couldn't handle keeping the memory in the buffer for the screens. That's the best way I can describe it. It would just like overlap one screen onto another and become a mess. And it would stay that way for a couple of seconds and then it would resolve itself. So I didn't have those kind of issues playing it on the Vita, which I suspect is just because it's a more powerful system, probably has more RAM in it for screen drawing and a faster processor and just overall more powerful in general. Now, what this doesn't have that the PSP Go has is the portability factor where you can just stick it in your pocket and you're off to the races. So the Vita performs better on PC Engine, but it boots up a little slower and it's not as portable. But I think the trade-off is worth it in the quality. It's just things to keep in mind, I guess I would put it that way. Also, as long as we're here looking at the Model 2000, I have to say I've noticed compared to the Model 1000 that there are things that I definitely prefer. The OLED screen is obviously a big selling point for the Model 1000 and why a lot of people covet that, but the raised buttons on the 2000 are really nice. Like, the start and select buttons in the lower right-hand corner are much easier to use. They were kind of flush with the system on the 1000, but on the 2000, they are very easy to press. The home button, too, is also raised, and it's definitely easier to hold for longer periods of time because it's lighter compared to the 1000. So it feels like it's mostly an improvement, and the only drawback is that it's not an OLED screen. But if you download a registry editor, which is shown off in a lot of Vita homebrew and modding videos, like Retro Game Core has done a video about modding the Vita and using the registry editor, You can actually go into the color palette settings of your Model 2000 and you can adjust the RGB range and the screen brightness and all those kind of things and actually make the display more vibrant and closer to being like an OLED screen without actually being OLED technology. So if that's something you want to do, then modding a 2000 is probably the right way to go. In fact, some people won't even use a 2000 without modding it. For me, I want to mod it just so I can do stuff like this, so I can play PC Engine games in an emulator, but you might have your own reasons. You might have other kinds of custom things you want to do with your Vita. Maybe you want custom themes. Maybe you want different boot up animations or music. There's all kinds of things you can do once you mod a Vita, so whatever you decide to do, that's up to you. You just need to go to the vita.hacks.guide and take it from there. It's really not that hard, but it is, of course, at your own risk, and to me, it's worth the risk to be able to play emulators and Homebrew, and there's some pretty amazing ones out there. The Sonic 1 and Sonic 2 remakes from Sega Master System are pretty sweet, and I'll have to get into those in a different video, one that's not focused on PC Engine like this one is. But I would also say not to use the Homebrew browser that comes by default in Vita Deploy. Get the better Homebrew browser. Just Google search that. It works way better. Hey folks, this is Mr. MegaManFan. Like, share, comment, subscribe. You know all the things to do. Continuing with the PlayStation Vita theme this week, we are looking at Homebrew on the Vita for Homebrew review. I'm going to assume a little bit of cursory knowledge going in. You know what h-encore and h-encore are. You know how to put Homebrew on a Vita using vita.hacks.guide. And you are okay with modifying a system in a way that Sony probably never intended through custom firmware. Given all of that, there are some amazing things you can do with Homebrew, and one of the things that I really like that I've discovered recently is called Better Homebrew Browser. If you use the Homebrew browser that comes with Vita Deploy, when you hack a Vita, it never does anything. Or some people say it will finally load if you just leave your Vita alone for 10 minutes. But who wants to assume it's doing anything when it sits on a black screen for 10 minutes? I certainly don't. At least with Better Homebrew Browser, it shows you that it's downloading and building a database, and it takes a couple of minutes, but when it does, you can find wacky things like Super Mario Kart, which you may remember from a famous Vinesauce video where he plays a parody Mario Kart game that's jankily programmed on purpose. It runs terribly, so it amuses me that this is on here, but as you can see, you can select different databases and different types of options in the Better Homebrew browser, and it works really well. But while we're downloading Super Mario Kart, which unfortunately didn't seem to work on my Vita, let me show you something that does. Gato Roboto. Now this one's kind of interesting. You can download the package from the Better Homebrew browser, but you actually need a copy of Gato Roboto to put into it. Thankfully, the game is available for free on Good Old Games, and if you go to the GitHub for this Vita modification of Gato Roboto, it even tells you get it from Good Old Games or buy it from Steam. But if you get the Good Old Games version, it's completely free, and what you do is open the zip file, run the installer, and then you'll have a folder with all the Gato Roboto assets. Then you apply it to a patch to turn it into what assets the Vita needs. And it's also recommended that you overclock your Vita to 500 megahertz, which you can do through a plugin once you have Homebrew enabled. But that will give you the best performance while playing Gato Roboto. And if you've never played it before, it's a Metroidvania type game starring an adorably cute cat who uses a mech suit. That's exactly what you're watching right here. I've played through this game several times now, and it never really seems to get old for me. There's only one thing that doesn't work the way I would expect it to compared to the other versions that I played, and that's that if you find custom color palettes, which are hidden items in the game, they don't display properly on the Vita. So just stick to the default black and white. But if you do, it's a fantastic game. If you even remotely like Metroid or Castlevania style games, you would absolutely love Gato Roboto. And since it's free, and if you have a modded Vita, you can run Homebrew, why not? It's incredibly fun. But there are other super fun things that you don't even need to download and patch to make work on the Vita. There are things that are ready to go right out of the box in the Better Homebrew browser. And I'm kind of amazed at some of them because of the fact that there are intellectual properties involved. But I do know that Sega has taken a rather lax approach to enforcement of IP compared to some other companies, especially as pertains to Sonic the Hedgehog homebrew games, because there are a lot of hacks and ports and games starring Sonic that are not officially made by Sega, but they seem to turn a blind eye to it for the most part, unless you were purposefully going out of your way to physically print up a Sonic homebrew and sell it for profit and claim it was a canon part of Sega's Sonic the Hedgehog games, then you might get into some deep doo-doo with them. But if you just make something for fun and put it on the internet for people to download, I guess they consider that free advertising for Sonic the Hedgehog. And in this case, I feel like I was already giving Sega my money because just today I bought the greatest hits version of Sonic Mega Collection for GameCube over at Ben's Game Zone in Ralston. So they're getting my money for Sonic the Hedgehog even if they're not getting it for this Vita port of the Sega Master System game. And it runs like a champ. I mean, you would expect it to, since you can run Sonic the Hedgehog games through RetroArch using all the different emulator cores that are available for RetroArch. But this is a little different because this is not just emulation of a Sega Master System. This is a port with widescreen support, and it looks beautiful, and I have not noticed any slowdown or tearing in this version on the Vita. So I think this is really fun, and it's free. I mean, the Vita itself certainly isn't free. If you get an import one like this, it could set you back a bill. If you get a domestic one, it could be more than that. So you might want to hack it and take advantage of some of the homebrew options that are available out there. And you might just want to play backups of your physical games as well. Beyond that, I can't really tell you what to do. I'm not going to go into gray areas that you can or can't justify to yourself. It's up to you at that point what you do with a hacked Vita, but you can certainly try things before you buy, which I always advocate on this channel. So feel free to use emulators or other means to go ahead and sample some of the things that you might want to spend your hard-earned money on. And like I said, if you spent the hard-earned money on a Vita, you might as well unlock it and get the full potential out of it. It's just amazing to me that the community takes the time and effort and puts the love into making things like a widescreen port of a Sega Master System game for the PlayStation Vita. I mean, there's diminishing returns on that, let's be honest. The Vita only sold like 20 million units worldwide compared to what? 100 million for DS and maybe 80 million for 3DS. I don't know the exact numbers off the top of my head, but it's like 1/5 the audience. So to put that kind of time and effort into a much smaller device, you are really showing some love to the community because you're giving something that you may put more effort into than people ever play. Whereas if you've got 100 million units of a console out there, you know that quite a few people are going to play it. Which also goes to show when you go to look for Vita games, sometimes you really do want to homebrew and hack because you can't find Vita games. Like, you go to stores and they maybe have 2 or 3 on the shelf if you're lucky, and sometimes they only have loose carts and they don't even have the boxes to go with the games. Which is one of the reasons I like to shop at Ben's, because he actually gets Vita games in the box, so it's nice to actually get a full set as opposed to a loose chip. And they are very small. They're like Nintendo Switch sized, so if you didn't put them in a storage case or a knockoff PlayStation Vita style box, you might just lose track of them at some point. So I like having the physical box for the games, and I like playing the Sonic 1 and Sonic 2 remakes on my hacked PlayStation Vita.